Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Sun Yat-sen Part 4, A Bombing in Wuchang by Extra History. Now last time we saw Sun Yat-sen building his movement abroad in Japan, attempting several different failed revolutions, and finally laying out his three principles of the people. They sort of hinted at the end of the last episode that we're finally going to see a successful revolution, which will of course be a big moment not only for Sun Yat-sen, but for China as a whole. Now, before we get into that, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
Revolutionary Safe House, Wuchang, October 9th, 1911. The bomb maker gingerly places the device with the others. In a few days, these explosives will signal revolutionaries and army officers, along with students and activists, to take up arms.
Right, and these were exactly the kind of people who were interested in movements like Sun Yat-sen's, though, of course, he wasn't the only one doing that sort of revolutionary work. We're talking about young professionals, lawyers, students, army officers, these types who had often imbibed many of these Western nationalist liberal ideas and wanted to bring them to China.
He reaches for another device.
Whoa.
The house's doors and windows blow out. Dust swirls the streets. Qing police arrive, and they find a membership book.
Uh-oh.
A book full of army officers' names. They realize where the explosives came from. Police begin hammering on doors. After 16 years of planning, the revolution is about to begin by accident.
Yeah. That's often how it is. I think I mentioned this last time, but throughout history, you have these professional revolutionaries who are constantly preparing, trying to cause a revolution in their respective country. And though sometimes they can see, all right, we have revolutionary conditions, almost no one can predict when exactly it's going to happen. In the revolution, many revolutions usually happen spontaneously, out of nowhere, by accident. And you'll find these revolutionaries who have been preparing for this moment their whole lives are caught off guard, because no one can predict when a real successful big revolution is going to kick off.
The revolutionaries in Wuchang were not part of Sun's faction. They were influenced by Sun
Right.
and in contact with his alliance, but this uprising, the Wuchang uprising, turned on local issues. See, when the Empress Dowager and Emperor died in 1908, the Emperor's 2-year-old son inherited the throne. And with the conservative Dowager Empress gone, officials ruling on behalf of the child emperor scrambled to implement reforms. They made moves towards constitutional monarchy, but it was too little too late. Every reform seemed a half measure, and they reneged on promises more than once.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can sometimes end up in this situation when you have an extremely stagnant regime that either doesn't try or fails to change, where eventually a moment comes when some people within the government get an opportunity to reform. But it's just never enough. The changes have gotten too big. Everyone expects there to be radical change. A lot of people want even more than radical change. They want the entire system to be overthrown. And so, when you do these reforms, even if some of them are major, it's just not going to seem like enough. Too little, too late.
The Qing had burned all their credibility,
Right.
and rumors swirled that they secretly planned to sell China out to foreigners.
Plus, there's that as well. Even if you see the government doing the Qing dynasty, doing the things that maybe you would have wanted, you just can't trust them. It's been too many years of them failing, China declining in power. As far as a lot of Chinese people are seeing it, the Qing dynasty giving up power and territory to imperial powers from around the world. Now, of course, the Qing dynasty did not want to lose all their power, but, people are extremely angry at them for not successfully resisting. And so, their credibility, trust in the government, it's gone.
At which point, they decided to take over the rail networks with foreign money and under foreign control. When people protested, Qing troops shot them. Outrage followed. Local revolutionaries in Wuchang planned to make their move. plotting an uprising between the secret societies and sympathizers in the new army,
Mm-hmm.
until the accidental bombing forced their hand.
Right.
October 10th, Double 10 Day. Police round up new army soldiers at random. Tensions are boiling hot. Several officers from the 8th Engineering Battalion corner a sergeant. They suspect he supplied the explosives, or knows who did. Tempers flare. The sergeant draws his revolver. Seconds later, the officers lie dead.
Damn.
The sergeant rallies his unit to mutiny and sees the city's arsenal. New army soldiers tie white cloths around their arms to mark themselves as revolutionaries.
Now, we're seeing a couple of things here, which is, first, already the symbolism of revolution. People are identifying themselves as revolutionaries. We see this with really almost every revolutionary you can point out. People need ways to identify each other. But also, and I've said this before when talking about multiple different revolutions, of course, military force is an extremely important aspect of any successful revolution. Unless you're talking about a sort of bloodless revolution, but that's not really what we're covering here. We're talking about a big, large-scale political, social, military revolution, right? And, what usually happens, or what usually is the case, is you've got your sort of ancien regime, right? The old regime. If they can maintain control of the military, they're probably all right. If they lose that, they're done. You can see that in the French Revolution. You can see that in the Russian Revolution, right? All these very archetypical revolutions. The Cuban Revolution. If you, the old government, can maintain control of your army, you can probably maintain control of your population. Maybe not for long, but for the moment. If you lose that control, if your military is, in part or fully no longer loyal to you, it's basically over. Because, sort of military force enforcing your authority is really the last thing you have as a government. Without that, you've not got much.
The street fighting begins. Revolutionaries storm the city's fort, sending the governor and commanding general into flight. Leaderless, the victory-drunk rebels move on to the neighboring city and force a popular army commander at gunpoint to become their commander. They make him draft telegrams to other provincial governments urging them to rise up.
Also, I love a good, forced position of leadership. We saw this in the Roman Empire more than once, a fair amount of times, where, you'd have, say, a general of an army who wasn't necessarily interested in political life. However, he'd see so much success that his men would declare him imperator, emperor, and he would really have no choice but to go along with it. And sometimes there was a real legitimate and obvious threat that was like, hey, you're going to accept us acclaiming you as emperor, or we might do something to you. And so you're sort of forced to accept this position as leader that you might not want to because it's so dangerous.
More units mutiny. More provinces expel the Qing. In some places, it's nearly a bloodless coup, but in others, revolutionaries massacre Qing officials and Manchu ethnic minorities.
Right.
By early December, only 8 of China's 22 provinces remain under imperial control. Sun, meanwhile, finds out about the uprising from a newspaper article in Denver. And 4 days later, he learns, again by newspaper, that he's been proposed as the first president of the republic. He didn't go back. Not immediately.
So this is what I was saying earlier, where, Sun Yat-sen, more than anybody, has been working towards such a revolution. When it happens, is he ready? Is he there? No. No one can predict these things. However, because of the work he's done, the groundwork he's laid, when it happens, a lot of people's first thoughts for who should lead this thing, well, it's towards him. Right? As you can tell, Sun Yat-sen has really established himself, established his credibility as the leading revolutionary of this movement.
Reasoning that he was a better diplomat than general, he instead hit Washington, D.C.,
Probably
London,
true.
and Paris. He wanted assurances that the Western powers would not intervene and would prevent Japanese intervention. He wanted a grant of loans to the new Republican government, and all loans to the Qing canceled. He was not successful exactly. None of the Western powers were taking bets on the outcome of the revolution quite yet. They would withhold all loans until a single legitimate government ruled China. No money for the revolutionaries, but no money for Beijing either. He'd accomplished little. But when he arrived in Shanghai on Christmas Day, he found that the diplomatic tour raised his prestige. And 4 days later, the Provincial Assembly overwhelmingly elected Sun as provisional
Hey,
president of the Republic of China.
not bad. I mean, this is probably what Sun Yat-sen has been dreaming of for his entire life. First and foremost, of course, an independent, free republic in China, but secondly, probably himself as the leader of that new government.
They swore him in on January 1st, 1912. Within 2 months, Sun had gone from an outcast rebel to the head of a republic. Yet there was no time to enjoy the moment. The revolutionary government was mired in peace talks.
Yeah, I mean, we know revolutions are usually not quick and easy and clean. In fact, it's sort of the nature of a revolution to be quite messy. And so, this might seem like the end point, the success for Sun Yat sen. Well, he's got his republic, he's the president, fantastic. But oh no, there's still a lot more work to be done and a lot more problems to deal with.
Not just with each other, but with Yuan Shikai.
Mm,
Yuan was currently Prime Minister of Imperial China. He was a general who'd been instrumental in creating the new army, but Beijing had forced him into retirement over worries about his popularity with
hmm,
the troops.
classic.
Called back due to the crisis, he'd used the court's desperation to secure both the office of Prime Minister and a series of reforms that gave in to many of the revolutionaries' demands for constitutional government.
And these are the type of men that can become very powerful in a moment like this. Now, with the revolution, what has happened is everything has been shaken up, right? People know the normal state of affairs no longer exists. Things are going to have to change. And the door's been opened to violence, political violence. Everybody knows that. And that's not just going to come from these revolutionaries, it's going to come from a couple of different factions. Now, men like Yuan Shikai, he's the sort of model of the successful general. In a situation like this, he becomes an even more powerful man. And we're going to see a lot of this over the next few years, few decades of Chinese history. A lot of these types of guys will become warlords, both military and political leaders who are really able to exercise violence, force in order to shape politics and have a lot of authority themselves. Another sort of instance of this that we can see throughout history is when, say, to go back to sort of ancient Rome again, if you have an emperor who's been overthrown, so you have an upstart who's overthrown the emperor, oftentimes that upstart, who is now the emperor, is going to have to worry about people overthrowing him. Because what has he shown everybody? Well, he's shown that through violence, popularity, and force, you can become emperor. Well, now everyone else wants to give it a shot. So whether, through a succession crisis, an overthrow, or a revolution, when you show people, hey, everything's shaken up, we're going to use violence, we're going to use warfare to achieve our political goals, well, everyone else is going to try that too. And once again, that's when Yuan Shikai becomes a very important person, more than he already was.
And just so happened to make the prime minister very powerful.
Hmm.
Earlier peace negotiations had produced a deeply unpopular agreement between Yuan and the revolutionaries. But that agreement was void anyway. Whether China would be a republic or a constitutional monarchy was supposed to have been settled with a national convention. But the revolutionaries had jumped the gun and declared a republic when they elected Sun.
Hmm.
So the day after Sun assumed the presidency, he sat down with Yuan for secret peace talks. Both Sun and Yuan were backed into a corner. Due to banking neutrality, neither state could secure foreign loans, and both had armies teetering on the verge of financial collapse. Neither could afford to continue fighting each other. If they worked out an agreement, though, credit could resume. If not, it would be bankruptcy and civil war. So Yuan made his play. He could convince the emperor to abdicate and recognize the republic. In return, Sun would resign the presidency and let Yuan take his place. Sun had little.
So, I mean, basically the situation here is he's saying, hey, you know what? Yuan Shikai is saying, I can overthrow the Qing dynasty. That's what you've always wanted, right? But to do it, you're going to have to give up, not only your own position, but in reality, your vision of this liberal republic. I'm sure Sun Yat-sen knew what was being asked of him, right? Yuan Shikai is going to overthrow the Qing dynasty. It'll be done away with, but he's going to grab power. This is the choice that Sun Yat-sen is offered.
Choice. And his dream wasn't to be president. It was to end Qing rule and replace it with a republic. This compact secured that.
Yeah.
He'd put country over self.
Well, yeah, but once again, sure, there's the personal aspect where he has to give up his position, but let's be clear. I think you'd have to have been pretty naive to believe that Yuan Shikai was going to take this deal and then, not interfere in politics? Set up a perfectly legitimate liberal republic. I mean, come on. I think it was pretty clear this upstart general, maybe not upstart, but this recently very powerful general was going to grab power for himself. I think Sun Yat-sen must have realized this. And this is a pretty consequential decision for him. I think you can maybe compare it to someone like Giuseppe Garibaldi, right? The Italian revolutionary who was advocating for an Italian republic his entire life. And when it got to the point, he was presented with an opportunity, which was he could continue to fight sort of on his own, independently, for an Italian republic, or he could side with Victor Emmanuel II, agree to make him king of this new Italy, but of course get all that power and the military force that Victor Emmanuel was bringing with him. And Garibaldi sort of goes with the safer choice, the choice that will more likely lead to an independent Italian state. He sides with the king. Here, Sun Yat-sen, I think, makes a similar decision. He could try to keep fighting for his vision of a liberal republic in China, but he was sort of on the edge. It was dangerous. He decides to go, I guess, for the decision that would more likely bring about a more unified, independent China, independent of Qing rule, I should say. But, of course, he's sacrificing a lot when he makes this choice, so a big moment here.
So he agreed, but with two caveats. The provisional president would lead from the new capital, not from his power base in Beijing, and Yuan would honor the constitution. All
Yeah, sure.
bills must go before parliament. Yuan went north to Beijing. 6 weeks later, the 5-year-old emperor and the officials that controlled him officially abdicated the throne, bringing 268 years of Qing rule and 2,000 years of imperial rule to a close in China. Sun resigned effective April 1st, and Parliament officially elected Yuan as the new president. Afterward, Sun conducted a ceremony in front of the first Ming emperor's tomb, officially conveying that the Qing usurpers had fallen and the Ming dynasty had been avenged.
Interesting. It's sort of a funny, tribute to pay, because I'm not sure they would have been thrilled about all this Republican business. I think they would have liked a continuation of an imperial dynasty. But of course, Sun Yat-sen is sort of playing on, I guess, the ethnic part of it rather than the political part of it.
But it soon became clear Yuan was not coming back from Beijing.
Obviously.
When called by Parliament, he instigated a fake coup, then claimed he had to stay to put down the rebellion.
Once again, classic stuff. This shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody. And I haven't read Sun Yat-sen's writings from this era. I don't know if we have anything from him on this in particular. I would be shocked if he was surprised by this. I think you'd have to be incredibly naive to be surprised by this. This is just a very clear revolutionary playbook that, as we've seen play out time and time again, from the days of ancient history to the modern era.
Parliament compromised and moved the capital to
From Caesar to Napoleon, you could name a lot of examples.
Beijing. In response, Sun, who had not been idle, released the new constitution. Originally, he had planned for it to be an American-style government. But when it became clear that Yuan would lead, he advocated a British-style government that limited presidential power.
Right.
The result was an ambiguous hybrid that left room for Yuan and ministers to split hairs over presidential power.
Tricky. And of course, there are many different systems throughout the world. The parliamentary system we've been talking about, a presidential system. Of course, you have countries like France, who have a parliamentary system, but with the president. Among presidential systems, there are examples of countries where the presidency is a little weaker. The United States was initially designed that way, but the president has gained more and more power over the years. But initially, the presidency was more of a weaker presidency versus Russia, the modern country of Russia, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, was designed as a super presidential system, which means a country where the presidency, not just in practice, but by design, is meant to have an extraordinary amount of power. And that power's also grown since the 90s. It seems like presidents like to take more and more power over time. No, well.
In the end, that flawed document would be Sun's presidential legacy, along with a Western calendar and the five-colored flag, meant to represent the equality of China's five major ethnic groups. Sun's allies formed a new political
I don't know if that would necessarily stick.
party, the Kuomintang, or Nationalist Party, to oppose Yuan. But to keep the peace, Sun tried to be apolitical, and largely handed control of the party to his friend Song Jiaoren, and took a government position as the head of railway construction. Meanwhile, Yuan Shikai drove out members of parliament opposed to his government, and stacked it with loyalists, appointing his own man as prime minister. So in the 1913 elections, Song Jiaoren and the Nationalist Party campaigned hard on a platform of protecting government institutions from Yuan's undue influence. A young, charismatic speaker, the
Surely this will all go well.
30-year-old Song had warned that Yuan would make himself emperor. The nationalists won an overwhelming majority. Everyone expected Song to become prime minister, until an assassin gunned him down on a train platform. An assassin investigators linked to Yuan's circle. That was March. In April, Yuan took out a £25 million loan from foreign powers, without consulting
25 million pounds, eh? I wonder what that is with inflation today. That's a lot of money.
Parliament. In May, he ceded control of Outer Mongolia to Russia. None of this sat well with the nationalists. And when nationalists in Parliament
No, I mean, remember, really, one of the main, if not, I think, the main reason why all these revolutionary types were angry with the Qing dynasty was because they couldn't resist a sort of Western and Japanese encroachment on their territory. Now, there's a lot of stuff bundled up in that, the failure to reform, to modernize, all that sort of stuff. But they were really angry and disappointed that the Qing dynasty was losing all this power and territory to the Western great powers, and increasingly Japan. And now what is Yuan Shikai doing? Well, seems like the same thing, which a lot of these liberals and nationalists are not gonna like.
Russia. None of this sat well with the nationalists. And when nationalists in Parliament accused Yuan of abusing his power and called for a permanent constitution, he declared them rebels and mobilized the army.
Uh-oh.
Sun and his people went for their guns. The second revolution was at hand.
Here we go.
But Yuan's army was just too large. Within 2 months, Sun and his nationalists were back where they'd started, sitting in exile in Japan, trying to overthrow a government
Once again.
in Beijing. From rebel to president and back, all in a little over 2 years. And they watched from afar as Yuan dissolved parliament, watched as he declared democracy a failed experiment, replacing their constitution with a document giving him unlimited power.
I love trying democracy for, like 1 or 2 years. Be like, it's failed. We're done with it. We tried it enough. Why don't we do another authoritarian government, hey? Everyone loved that so much under the Qing dynasty. What if we did something like that, but a little different?
Watched as he handed provinces out to generals who ruled as military governors. Watched Yuan accept economic demands that, if they came to pass, would make China a Japanese protectorate.
Yeah, surely all of this is going to set China up for a stable and prosperous future, and not a future where the country is broken down into what are, frankly, medieval fiefdoms, into different pieces of territory owned by warlords. Surely that isn't where all of this is heading, right?
And finally, watched as Yuan crowned himself emperor. It had been 20 years since Sun's first uprising, and things had come full circle. There was an emperor in Beijing, Sun was in exile, and he and his comrades were planning an uprising.
Alrighty. Well, next time, which I believe is the last episode in this series, we're gonna see what can Sun Yat-sen manage to do. You know, he sort of found his success. Republican China, he was president, then he managed to lose it pretty quickly. Now he's back to where he once was. What can he do? Can he achieve his dream of a Republican China? Can he free the country from Yuan Shikai's grasp? Will he fail? A lot of questions going around. We'll find all that out in the last episode. Thank you guys for watching this one. If you liked it, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below, and will give you access to exclusive reaction content. With all that, I hope you guys are having a great day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.